Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Right now, as you're listening to this, it's officially, as crazy as it sounds, mid-July. That is important for one very simple reason. Mid-July in college sports means one thing: media days across college football. I think for most fans, media days, really, you kind of start to pay attention when the SEC kicks off their media days, and the SEC begins next week in Nashville starting on Monday. Except here's the thing. If you're a real diehard college football fan, you know that media days actually kicked off on Wednesday when the Big 12 hosted their media days. Big 12 as a conference is obviously at a very interesting inflection point. 2023 will mark the final season that Texas and Oklahoma are in this league, but 2023 also marks the start of 4 new teams joining as well. Houston has joined the league, BYU has joined the league, Cincinnati, and UCF. So for this 1 year, we're going to have 14 teams. Next year, we'll go down to 12. But the conversation that has seemingly been going on all off season is what happens next. Does the Big 12 stay at 12 teams going forward, or do they further expand? And we've talked about all the expansion candidates through the summer. Colorado out of the Pac-12, maybe Arizona, maybe some of those other corner schools. For people who are new to my work, I am a UConn alum. I think I have some pretty good contacts at UConn. They are obviously in the mix. Gonzaga maybe in the mix as a basketball-only conference. San Diego State is out after the last couple weeks. Well, what is going to happen next? It remains to be seen. But Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark was asked about it at Big 12 Media Days on Wednesday. And let me say this. He actually made a very, very, very interesting comment if you listened closely to what he said. Here is what Brett Yormark, commissioner of the Big 12, said about Big 12 expansion when he was asked about it. He said, "We do have a plan, and hopefully we can execute that plan sooner rather than later. But as I've always said, I love the composition of this conference right now. The excitement the 4 new members have brought to this conference has been incredible. If we stay at 12, we're perfectly fine with that. If the opportunity presents itself where there's something that creates value and aligns with our goals and objectives, starting with the board, then we're certainly going to pursue it." Now, on the one hand, at first, it does sound like a pretty generic, hey, we're happy with where we're at, but we're always keeping our options open, right? Like that just sounds like the most generic, commissioner speak you could ever hear. But there was one very, very, very interesting piece at the end. Did you hear the last sentence of what Brett Yormark said? He said, if the opportunity presents itself where there's something that creates value and aligns with our goals and objectives, starting with the board, that's the important part right there, starting with the board, then we're certainly going to pursue it, because ultimately all you need to know is this. Any Big 12 expansion decision, it really does come down to the board, which is the 12 current school presidents. And that's what you got to watch out for. That's what you got to figure out. You want to figure out where expansion goes, figure out what the presidents want to do, excuse me. And it's interesting, right? Because I think we've talked about this all summer long. We've seemingly talked about Big 12 expansion since the day UConn cut down the nets in Houston to win the national championship in basketball. But really, what I have said all summer is pretty consistent. If it was up to Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, remember, he's an East Coast guy, worked in New York, worked in the agency world, Rock Nation. He, to me, strikes me as a type A, New York, fast-paced, let's get you-know-what done right now. If we're getting it done now, it should have been done yesterday kind of guy. And my belief and my understanding, talking to people across college sports, if it was up to him, we would be moving a lot faster with expansion. But ultimately, those presidents decide everything. And I find it very interesting because we talked about this about a month ago, is that if you follow the expansion tea leaves, the conference realignment tea leaves, it felt like there was all sorts of news coming out all April, all early May. And then what happened? The Big 12 had its league meetings in late May. Remember, it was right around the same time we had SEC meetings down in Destin. The Big 12 had league meetings. And that was when conference realignment went from full speed ahead to kind of slowing down a little bit. And what I said at the time and what I believed at the time was that essentially it's exactly what I just said. Yormark's a full speed ahead, 1,000 miles an hour kind of guy. But ultimately, he doesn't have final say. The 12 sitting school presidents, if you include the 4 new schools, they're the ones with the final say. And so when you have one person unilaterally making decisions, he's going to move forward. But now you have 12 different people with 12 different agendas, 12 different timelines trying to get all this figured out. And so it's been fascinating to see the kind of holdup, and it's fascinating that Yormark kind of references it's a school, if it falls in line with the school presidents. And that's why I think things are moving so slow. 12 school presidents with 12 different agendas. Some of them only want schools coming from Power 5 leagues. Some of them want only schools that are focused on football. Some are more willing to talk about the basketball schools like a Gonzaga, like a UConn, even though UConn would come for football. Some of them don't want to give full share. Some of them don't care. They just want whatever the commissioner wants. 12 different schools with 2 different agendas. And then I think obviously the other big thing, slowing down expansion, is obviously the other big conversation that we've had, which is the Pac-12 media deal. I've been talking to my sources all offseason, and I do think that these Pac-12 schools, they're hesitant to really make a move, until they see what the Pac-12 has to offer in terms of a TV deal. Now, I know for a fact there's a few that are getting impatient, most notably Colorado, I think to a degree Arizona as well. But most of these schools, they can't leave the Pac-12 until they know what the Pac-12 has to offer. Because if the Pac-12 somehow can put together a better deal than the Big 12 got, and I don't think it's going to happen, but then you look dumb if you just left for the Pac-12 and left money on the table. So those are the 2 things that I believe are slowing things down. The school president's got to figure things out, the board, if you will, and then the Pac-12 has to figure out its TV deal. And then if the Pac-12, it doesn't work out, then you start having the conversations. And so to me, it's going to be fascinating to follow. I think the obvious next big thing is seeing what happens with that Pac-12 TV deal and then what happens next. In terms of what is actually going to happen with expansion, I think it could go in a number of different directions. I think there's the first possibility, which is that the Pac-12 TV deal falls apart. It isn't what anybody wants. The numbers are way below what the Big 12 is going to get, let alone what the SEC and the Big 10 are going to get, and other schools start looking around. If that happens, Colorado is gone. I've been saying it for months. Most people have been saying it for months. I'm not saying I'm anything special because that's been pretty common knowledge. I think Colorado's ready to move now. They're just making sure they're not leaving money on the table. Arizona, I believe, is ready to move now. It feels like most of that fan base is ready for something different, to keep it going, to keep the conversation moving. I think there's the possibility that you go with some Pac-12 schools and another school outside, UConn. And again, I know I'm an alum, but it's also been reported like UConn is a real candidate for the Big 12, and they see the value in basketball. And oh, by the way, I think there is value in football, as crazy as it sounds, with Jim Moore as the head coach. Remember, they went to a bowl game last year. They beat Liberty last year, which was they beat Boston College, Power 5 team. That was in year 1 under Jim Moore. Big things ahead in year 2. I know you're laughing, UConn football. I'm being dead serious when I say this. I think what would be interesting is if the Pac-12 schools don't leave. And I don't think that's going to happen. But if the Pac-12 schools don't leave, if Colorado and Arizona stay, if they get the TV deal that they want, then what happens? That's where it gets interesting, because does the Big 12 still want to expand if it's a UConn and a Gonzaga? That part, I don't know. I think they're banking on having a few of those Pac-12 schools and then supplementing it with maybe UConn, maybe Gonzaga, maybe something like that. And I do think the possibility exists that if the Pac-12 deal is great and they don't see value in those other schools, that they stay at the 12 that they are. But my guess is this league is constantly evolving. This league is constantly changing. And I do think we are going to get some movement and expansion. But again, I think the big thing, the big domino is what is that Pac-12 TV deal? Because from there, then we start to get clarification on, is Colorado going to stay? Is Arizona going to stay? And then maybe you grab a few of those schools, somebody else, maybe a UConn. It remains to be seen.